Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for this special snap edition of Current Briefings in response to the energy price guarantee. Today's session will be split fairly evenly between prepared questions and those from the audience. So I'd just like to quickly flag if you have any questions at any point in the discussion that you'd like to put to our panelists, just stick it in the questions box in the right-hand corner, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. I'm joined by four fantastic panelists today, who I would like to quickly ask to introduce themselves. So Stuart, I wonder if you could kick us off.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Stuart Dosser. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor working at Green Alliance, focused on low carbon futures and in particular power sector decarbonisation.
Simon?
Hi everyone, nice to see everyone. I'm an associate with E3G, long history in the energy industry, now focusing on all matters energy transition.
Robert?
Hi, I'm Robert Buckley from Cornwall Insight. Been researching the energy retail market since 2005.
Rachel?
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Rachel, Associate Director at Regen. So we're an independent not-for-profit supporting the energy transition.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. And I suppose without further ado, we can jump straight into questions. So to start with, what sort of impact will the energy price guarantee have on the energy industry? Rachel, I wonder if you wanted to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. So I think that the impact on the industry is a really positive one. The certainty for suppliers, ensuring people aren't defaulting on their bills, making sure that the industry stays afloat and everything is relatively smooth is a positive sign. I think this is a very short-term measure that we've seen in a kind of response to the current crisis, and we're all in agreement that we need to see some kind of longer term support measures. And I think that's where the industry really kind of kicks in and comes in at that point. So yeah, exploring the options around reform and things that we'll come on to a bit later, I think are where the industry needs to come together. I think we recognise that, we want to see the benefits of a low carbon and cost effective renewable system flowing through to consumers, and the renewables industry needs to play its part in that.
Absolutely. Stuart, I wonder if there's much you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I agree with everything Rachel said. I think trying not to cover the same ground, but one of the interesting things I think that will come out of this is that with HM Treasury contributing to the cost of energy usage for households and businesses, households for 2 years, businesses for 6 months, potentially more, it now has a financial incentive for the first time to reduce energy wastage. But we didn't see this in any of the package of measures that were announced alongside the price guarantee. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that develops and whether we do see a move towards, for example, energy efficiency measures within households. The Energy Supply Task Force as well that was announced, there's no real detail on this yet, but I think by ruling out a windfall tax in advance, the government has potentially put itself in a slightly weaker position than it otherwise would have done to negotiate new long-term contracts. So those generators with low or zero input costs that are benefiting from the high prices will need to be offered attractive terms in order to be sufficiently incentivized to take that up. And then just thinking through some of the other announcements, short term, we're not going to see any meaningful amounts of gas coming from new North Sea licenses or from fracking, certainly not within the next 2 years. So that's not really going to do anything.
Very timely, as officially the moratorium has been lifted today. Robert, I wonder if there's much you'd like to add.
Yes, thank you, Molly. Second all that's been said by Rachel and Stuart. I actually think that this is quite a profound moment for the retail market. Once you get the state involved, it's very difficult for it to move out. I think we've seen all, and I mean this in a good sense, we've seen all kinds of lobbying to get the state involved in the first place to ameliorate bills for consumers. We've seemed to have set an expectation in the level of the price guarantee and the numbers that yesterday came out for business as to what reasonable looks like. How do we want to work ourselves out of this situation? I suggest we probably do, but I think once entered into, These things are very, very difficult to unwind. As I said, I second all that was said about the operational relief that this brings on the production side and the consumer side. I'd also just say be careful what you wish for.
Simon, any final points on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I reinforce what Robert says. I mean, I think, I mean, clearly there was all sorts announced, but focusing narrowly on the energy price guarantee, I think this really is quite a fundamental moment. We've spent 30 odd years with the market based around a narrative of competition and market processes delivering for consumers. That's now clearly dead, and it's not been replaced by anything. The question you asked was, what does it mean for the industry? Well, it's really quite fundamental. Much of the industry, particularly on the retail side, has been based around consumer focus and competition as a means for retaining and gaining consumers. We're now looking much more at fairly standard regulated business models. That's a huge shift. That's where the value looks as if it's going to be, not just for the short term, but for the foreseeable medium term focus. Clearly, the trick for government is to see if it can align its consumer protection policies with actually delivering benefits for consumers that the businesses can focus on. It's far from clear that we're at that stage at the moment.
And with this consumer protection, I'm going to mostly direct our questions today around the sort of impact on the industry. But just quickly before we get into that, does this measure go far enough to protect customers? I know we all saw the sort of horrible figures about just how bleak this winter was going to be beforehand. Would you have liked to have seen this go further? Do you think this does enough? Stuart, do you want to start on that one?
Sure, thank you. So does it do enough to protect consumers? Yes and no, I guess, to sit on the fence somewhat. It's a big package, but National Energy Action, for instance, is still predicting that we're going to have up to 6.7 million households living in fuel poverty this winter, which is a really quite significant amount. It was positive to see that the announcement was for 2 years, not for 1 year, as was predicted beforehand. So it does give some additional certainty. But I do think there needs to be further communication around this, as more in common put out some research from focus groups this week saying that there's a lot of confusion about what the package actually is and still a lot of anxiety about what it means for consumers this winter.
Yeah. I know there was some figures out from Uswitch today showing that 40% of people think their bills couldn't possibly go over £2,500, which does seem to sort of speak to the confusion from the general public amidst all the sort of concern as well. Robert, I wonder if you wanted to add in to, does this go far enough to protect customers?
Well, it depends on the individuals involved, doesn't it, as has been said. And yeah, without getting too political about it, it is going to get very political as different parties make the case for more, and some people say that there are some out there who shouldn't be supported who are being supported.
Rachel or Simon, was there much you wanted to add on this?
I don't think I have a huge amount to add, Molly. I just, yeah, as we're seeing, the support is very helpful. I think Stuart's point around communication is really important to help people understand what it means to them, and how to work that out. It does definitely increases people to use less energy, which I think is a healthy message overall, but in fuel poor homes and those that are most vulnerable, people with disabilities who are really reliant for medical needs on increased electricity use, etc. There isn't any additional support for those people, so I think that it is a healthy measure. But I think there's some talk around social tariffs and options that target people in need more specifically, which I think are certainly worth exploring, just to ensure that it isn't a kind of blanket. What in the moment we have is a very simple blanket reduction across the board, which helps those that can well afford their energy bills the same way that that those are really struggling. And people were really struggling at the beginning of this year around the kind of £900 mark for their energy bills, and going up to potentially 2,500 as that average home bill is a significant jump for people already in fuel poverty, already deciding whether to heat or eat, and that is hugely concerning for people on the breadline.
And there's clearly no right answer to what's fair, and that means we can expect this to evolve as we go forward. It's important to remember that the package we see is a product of expedience rather than any great deep intellectual thought, and that means there are people who are being helped who don't need to be helped, and there are people who aren't being helped enough. That's inevitable. That'll be changed. For me, the big thing that needs to be introduced, which certainly isn't there now, is really some clarity around what is expected of consumers in terms of the energy market going forward. What is the bargain that the government is giving them going forward in terms of what the government is going to do and what it expects from consumers to do in return. Previously, it's all been switch and save. It's up to you to look after yourself. Well, that's clearly changed. But what's it changed to? And to have that clarity will enable people to begin to think through, well, okay, I know where I am perhaps this winter, or once I've worked it out, I'll know where I am this winter. But what about next winter? What about next summer? Very important for business customers, obviously.
Absolutely. Simon, what would you like to see that balance look like? What would you like to see sort of asked of the consumers by the government?
Well, for me, there are two really important issues for consumers. There's the who pays issue, between different groups of consumers or consumers in society, or between present and future, and that's really, really important. The issue that hasn't been thought about, which over time is actually hugely significant, is the issue about resource efficiency. If we're not investing in the cheapest assets, if we're not using assets as cheaply as possible, we are going to waste billions and billions of pounds over years, which consumers are going to pick up. And consumers have a role in making sure that we are using energy efficiently and resources efficiently, and that's both in terms of energy wastage, but also in terms of smart usage, which will become increasingly available. So for me, I think the bargain between government and consumers is, we will make sure you are paying fairly. The bargain is that you use efficiently, and we will help you use efficiently.
Oh, Molly, you're on mute there.
Thank you. You'd think 3 years in, 2.5 years in, I would have got the hang of this. Yes, but that is one of the big questions that still sort of remains unanswered. What other big questions do we still need clarification from government on in order for this to really make a difference? Rachel, I wonder if you could start with that.
Yes, I think, in the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen huge levels of ambition from government, which as a sector, I haven't seen certainly in my 15 years in the sector. And that's quite exciting, I think. So what I'd really like from government is not to see that rolled back in any way, the new administration. We've seen rumours around the energy security bill being withdrawn, that being moved into a growth bill. But there are some particular elements that we're very keen to keep. There's some really good stuff in the energy bill. The low carbon heat stuff, the local heat network zoning, we manage the electricity storage network, actually finally seeing the definition of storage moved into legislation, into law was quite exciting. To see that withdrawn at this stage would be quite disappointing. And the kind of the future direction travel around the future system operator, if the rumours are true and it is kind of axed and moved into a growth bill, then there are some things that we'd certainly like to see retained, because there was some great stuff in there. So yeah, that's my main ask. Also, we did an event earlier this week on REMA, and BEIS officials were very kind of certain that it was a separate process, but also highlighted there was huge amounts of lobbying from the oil and gas sector that this wasn't needed, and that's obviously it's a huge concern. And we know there are important elements of market reform that are needed to support renewables and a net zero power system by 2035. And I'd like to see REMA protected and continued in that. So yeah, and I think under REMA there are some particular elements that are very, very important, and also energy efficiency. As we're all going to agree with each other there. There's certainly a glaringly obvious absent member of the kind of the mix, the ingredients in the party here. So I think that we would really like to see some measures on energy efficiency, local approaches to energy efficiency, to heat decarbonisation. I think that's really important. So I'm sure we could talk about that all day.
Absolutely, it does seem to be kind of consistently with every new thing the government rolls out, the industry collectively seems to scream energy efficiency every single time.
It's such a political hot potato, and I can see why no one wants to touch energy efficiency after the Green Homes Grant. But the paper from Energy UK yesterday highlighting the kind of Eco Plus measure, like any future scheme, we need to see something, and we need to see something with long-term certainty in place to enable the supply chain to get up to speed, and to actually kind of mobilise and recruit around that. And that's been the main downside of any scheme previously. So it doesn't seem a hard fix to actually design a scheme that's suitable, but it's not been managed as of yet.
Absolutely. And with these big questions still remain to be answered, Robert, what strikes you as the biggest points that we need more information from government from?
I think I just wanted to go back to something that Simon said actually about fairness. I think this concept of fairness is very, very nebulous, but it's clearly very strong particularly on the retail side of the market, and we seem to be interpreting that as everybody pays the same price for everyone. Now, that's one definition of fairness. Other definitions of fairness might include a right to heat and warmth to an equal standard, which would certainly draw in more of equity and more of the energy efficiency that's been talked about. So I think we need to talk about fairness. I think if we don't, then at the moment we have put the state in as a kind of distressed seller to consumers. I don't think it would be too great a stretch of imagination, and maybe under a different government, for that single seller to become a single buyer. Certainly for the domestic retail market, and that would have huge implications for what I can see is pretty much an upstream and investor-based audience. That people are kind of in the sector kind of thinking, oh well, the consumers have got some money, they'll pay their bills, it'll all be all right, we'll all muddle through, and it's kind of business as usual. Where's REMA? We had an event on REMA yesterday as well. It's obviously a theme. But I do think that these two interventions are extremely significant and should not just be parcelled up on as a retail thing. How consumers pay directs where the money comes into the industry. The suppliers at the moment have control of that money, and we have a competitive market behind it. Where do we go next?
Good question to ask. Stuart, for you, what are the big questions that still need to be clarified?
I think most of them have been covered already, but sort of taking it back to the high level again, it's just really around how is this paid for, by who, and over what time period? And we really don't have much detail at all on any of those questions, but they are really quite significant for all the reasons that have been set out already.
Simon?
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many big questions. I come back to this sort of clarity of narrative, and picking up on the single buyer point. We moved to a single buyer when the trading arrangements were changed nearly 10 years ago, but we didn't want to call it that. We still wanted to call it a market, and so we ended up with a Frankenstein of a single buyer, Frankenstein's monster of a single buyer. And changes such as the future system operator, we're slowly sort of tangoing our way towards a more sensible form of single buyer. We're tangoing our way towards a more sensible way of operating a decentralized renewable system. Those things are absolutely critical. But the government has put itself in the situation now where it hasn't got a way of talking about that, so that participants, stakeholders, both industrial, investor or consumer, really know what the world is that they're participating in over the coming months, years, and certainly decades. So I think there are an awful lot of gaps to fill in. And just picking up on the point on the energy bill, I mean, the rumours are swirling around what the future of that bill may or may not be. There's clearly a lot of important stuff in there. There were some important things that could have gone in there that weren't in there. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to make sure there is a focus in that bill on an efficient energy system, which will ultimately deliver the lowest prices to consumers and will ultimately create low input costs to the economy, which will drive the growth that the government is after.
The clarity over whether or not the energy bill is on the chopping board completely, and also the end of the REMA consultation are things that hopefully we should sort of start seeing responses to and more clarity on in the next month or so. Is there anything else you'd like to see coming out of the government over the next month in particular to support customers and the energy industry beyond just clarity on some of these really crucial sort of points? Robert, do you want to start us on that?
Well, hopefully the two schemes have been put in place very, very quickly. There seems to be confidence that they'll be deliverable. That's a good thing. It would be great to understand a little bit more about how it's going to be funded. That's certainly stuff that we will be looking out for tomorrow when we get the financial statement. And as I said, it's very easy to get ourselves in this situation, and these two interventions really do overlay over the whole of the market, and they will. And if they're left there and we can't see a way out, they will shape everything beneath it. So I think we'd be looking for what the route out is, and something rather better than the route out that was signposted way back when from the default tariff cap.
Rachel?
Yeah, so I think, as Robert says, I think this is short-term crisis fix. What we want is to know how we're getting out of this, how we can shape the industry. To get to a 2035 power system, there's lots of numbers around, but we need around between 100 and 150 gigawatts of renewables and 10 times more storage. Other numbers are available, I'm sure. But the fundamental problem we're seeing as an industry at the moment is around grid connections, and we're doing a huge amount of engagement with relevant parties around that, and that is really holding up the sector. That is holding up deployment of the sector. The investments there, the developers are there, projects are there. Everything is rosy, but we are seeing that as a real barrier, and so. That was mentioned in the energy security strategy, grid connections, etc., as a kind of a little line, which is very helpful. But we'd like to see that kind of retained, and that is a key issue for us at the moment.
Absolutely. Simon?
Well, what I'd like to see, I think, is a move away from a policy process which is really focused on damage limitation and making the best of a bad job, to something which begins to set a positive agenda for the future that everybody can get behind. And just as an example of that, we have an opportunity now to really start to align the energy challenges with the digital opportunities and the opportunities of digitalization and how they can actually make people's lives better. So the government has shown it's prepared to do some really big stuff. I mean, the costs of the energy price guarantee are vast. At a fraction of that sort of cost, perhaps actually something that's self-funding, you could begin to drive deployment of new digital technologies, not just across the grid, but also with consumers, that begin to create a modern energy system that make people's lives better and support the energy transition. So that's just a sort of example of shifting the narrative from making the best of a bad job to something that's a lot more positive.
Stuart, any final points?
Yeah, so I think in terms of supporting consumers in the immediate term, we've heard about the financial support now. I think we need to couple that with non-financial support. I think we need to see a campaign coming from the government highlighting energy efficiency measures that all households can adopt. We're talking about the basic things such as draft proofing, optimizing your boiler settings, adjusting your thermostat, these kind of very easy energy efficiency measures that anyone can undertake. I think there's also potential for the creation of warm home units that can be put in empty retail units on high streets that are a sort of one-stop shop that can offer advice and support to consumers, and also act as a mechanism to connect consumers with builders or contractors if these individuals are looking for more invasive energy efficiency measures than the ones I mentioned before. I think then coupled with that and more focused on the energy industry itself, we need the energy bill. It'd be really damaging if the energy bill were to be shelved. But I think while there's some good stuff in there, which Rachel mentioned earlier, I think there's also plenty of scope to amend it to do a couple of things. So first is to catalyse a really significant step on the path to decarbonising the electricity system. You could also bring in the government's targets for minimum energy efficiency standards for buildings into law, give them a much firmer footing and put some impetus behind that. And I think also giving Ofgem a net zero statutory duty in relation to, which really help on the anticipatory investment point for the grid infrastructure. And it speaks to the point Rachel was making before about the difficulties we're seeing with grid constraints at the moment.
Absolutely, grid constraints and energy efficiency.
Molly, just drawing on my own personal experience last week, I think the industry, the suppliers, the energy industry can do a bit better as well. So I had finally got a smart meter installed last week, and the guy was in my home for nearly 2 hours. At the very end of that experience, he said, one of my tick list things is I need to talk to you about energy efficiency. And he said, just don't fill your kettle up too full when you're making a cup of tea, and, some other things like that. And that was the end. That was the entire end of his energy efficiency chat with me. Not knowing I worked in the sector, I didn't necessarily need the chat. I didn't want to stop him. I wanted to see where he got to, and it was wholly disappointing and a really missed opportunity when you've got a tradesperson in your home, to support you in that area. So I think as suppliers can do better when they are engaging with consumers directly. And so I think rather than financial support from government, I think that customer experience, the methods in which we communicate with customers and help them understand these key issues and stuff is really important, that Stuart mentioned, building on that softer side.
Absolutely. Suppliers are so often the sort of front line of communicating between the energy industry and consumers that they've got a really integral role to play. Moving into the questions from the audience, and we've got loads through, so I'll get to as many as we possibly can. Starting off with one from Freddie Ashford, who said, can we talk about what is expected from the energy suppliers? It appears to me that these measures will benefit the consumer only in the short term, with increased taxpayer debt being leveraged to insulate supplier profit margins. The measures are not going to create any lasting systemic changes. Is there anyone in particular who wants to jump in, or should I just throw it out to the room?
Shall I defend the supplier's right to make a profit?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, they wouldn't be around and providing the service if they were not, and the retail profit margin is not very big. I do agree, though, with the premise of the question that this is a very expensive sticking plaster intervention, and as others have said on the call, we really need to decide what the purpose is of what we're doing. It's the Cornwall Insight house view, if you like, that these high prices are here with us for several years to come, and interventions on this scale will be required, not this winter, next winter, the winter after that, unless we change our behaviour. So, we've bought ourselves, the government has bought some time for this winter, maybe next winter, maybe out to the next general election. But others have said far more eloquently than me some of the big strategic and policy questions that need addressing.
And does anyone else want to jump in on that, Simon?
I mean, in a past life, I was a director of strategy at an energy company, and my observation would be that in those days we spent our time agonising over tiny, small changes of direction in an industry that was largely stable. It does seem to me now that supply businesses really have some huge choices to make about the future of the market in which they operate and how they want to participate in that market and win in that market. We almost have a blank sheet of paper, I think, at the moment. So I wouldn't want to prejudge what those options are. I would just say there are some huge options out there that are available.
And next question in from Douglas Blackwell. Will this wake the government up into helping business to adopt as much on-site renewable energy generation, as the business cases are very strong with megawatt hour rates at the £400 plus? It makes no sense for any business to not adopt this on-site renewable energy generation strategy. Stuart, I wonder if you could crack it on.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to go into the future and become somewhat speculative here. Others may want to bring it more near term. I think one of the interesting dynamics we're seeing at the minute is a very large fiscal loosening coupled with a monetary tightening, and we'll see what the Bank of England does in terms of interest rates with its announcement. But what that might actually mean in the long term in terms of government debt and the rate of the cost of servicing that debt. Particularly if economic growth ends up being low and the debt doesn't pay for itself, as it seems to be the policy, and whether that may actually end up then moving back towards a period where you see a shrinking of government spending and where that hammer may fall. These kind of schemes that help businesses to adopt on-site renewables or consumers to adopt energy efficiency measures or whatever it may be, could be a casualty of any future tightening. So yeah, I think we're in a really interesting economic situation, and it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen.
Rachel, is there anything you want to add?
Yes, yeah, so just two things really from me. So one is, the price crisis has really brought energy to the forefront of everyone's minds, both consumers and businesses, and anyone looking to protect themselves from rising price increases is, I'm sure, considering what they can do, and renewables and fixed-term PPAs, etc., are a solution. Admittedly, fixing prices for PPAs at the moment, you are seeing quite a lot of spikes in that market, understandably so. So that's a positive. Like everyone is looking at this as an opportunity, as a way to protect themselves, etc. And it is becoming a more significant cost to consider. I think the other options that have been presented as part of REMA is around a green power pool and government potentially underwriting some of those longer term PPA prices as options for the market. And I think as that plays out, I think that's something quite interesting to explore. But yeah, I guess the devil's in the detail of those things, and we're not there yet in terms of what that looks like. It's hugely complex and intellectually challenging, even for some of the biggest brains at Regen. So I think that as the REMA kind of options and measures play out, I think it's worth exploring those different areas. But the green power pool is seeming like an attractive option at the moment.
And the next question in from Sam Leon, what percentage of non-residential consumers are we expecting to recontract from October and need support compared to those who previously contracted at lower rates? How has the total cost of the package been estimated? Robert?
That's a really good question. So this is something which actually was a call with colleagues first thing this morning to try and flesh out. Now we've seen the numbers that have come on alongside the government support package. At the risk of being wrong, which we will be, our general view is a lot of the volume out there with larger corporates is pretty well hedged. And will probably fall outside of this because they've been running rolling hedges for a long period of time. So this is good credit rated, large consumers, public sector baskets, that kind of thing. They've been doing rolling hedges. They're very, very substantial buyers. We've also had on the small and medium size, we've got some businesses who have contracted through the summer. They'll be eligible for support. There's a small minority that have still got fixed price contracts that run through this winter. The areas where we have seen people struggle to get contracts, it's been pretty public that many suppliers have not been quoting for pubs, clubs, hospitality, consumer facing businesses, really in the backwash of COVID. So there's a lot of trouble there, and some of those sectors have been very vocal. So we would expect that this support will actually fall quite heavily on certain sectors of the economy, and in many ways that's the right thing because of the contracting behaviour of the consumers. Which is we haven't worked out the volumes yet, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of how we're thinking about it.
Absolutely. On to the next question from Stacey Brentnell. Do we expect the new CFD that the Security Task Force are working on will reduce costs significantly post E3G? Anyone have any particular thoughts on that?
Sorry, someone tell me what E3G and another acronym.
Energy price guarantee.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Sorry. So I think just I got my microphone off. So I think the CFD is a really important scheme that's working really well. We're seeing the CFD pay back on consumer bills with figures I think are around 29. Sorry, washing machine's going in the background. Around 29 pound onto the consumer bill in the latest price cap. I'm not quite sure, Robert, you probably know better than me how this is now calculated in the future. I'm not quite clear on that now. The price cap isn't really the thing.
The money will be recycled via Elexon to keep the suppliers whole.
Okay. So we are seeing then the kind of the push from government now to see people renegotiate ROs and move to a CFD, and I think I'm sure the government would like to come out in the Q1 next year and announce that X number of megawatts have moved from an existing RO onto a CFD. And so I think we will see that kind of voluntary movement from the industry. I think we think it's probably too tricky to make it a mandatory thing, but I guess time will tell in that space. So yeah, the CFD is a constructive mechanism and is working well and can support low cost renewables coming onto the system.
And
Can I just sort of chip in that? I mean, there are really two issues. There's the who pays issue. So what CFD or the introduction of CFD to the existing portfolio does is it reallocates who pays for the assets we already have. The secondary issue going forward is how you allocate CFDs and how you set the price for CFDs, and that will be the dominant factor going forward. So what is the process for identifying the investments that are needed, and how do we ensure that those are cleared at efficient prices for consumers? So over time, they will be the issues that dominate in terms of impacts on consumers.
The next question in from Simon Maloney. Should community energy be more supported by government policy? Stuart, I wonder if you could jump in on that one.
Happy to. Community energy is not an area I have deep expertise in, so for others who have views, then feel free to jump in.
So I sit on the board of Community Energy England, the voice of the community energy sector. So absolutely, community energy should be more wholly supported by government. That is a really good opportunity. So there's huge amounts of social value that's delivered by £1 per megawatt hour for community projects. We're seeing at the moment community energy schemes delivering huge energy efficiency projects in their local area. They're trusted intermediaries, really able to kind of build a relationship and support people, as well as getting megawatts in the ground, and engaging, seeing the engagement that comes with those projects with schools, on village hall roofs, etc. The kind of broader social community benefit is really important. Community energy isn't supported by government currently in any form now, with the kind of demise of the Rural Community Energy Fund earlier this year, and it is a shame. So yeah, we would certainly like to see that kind of raised up the agenda. I think that this government isn't particularly interested in community energy. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Just on that, it's part of a wider problem that we have an industry which is designed about making life easy for the industry, rather than making life easy for consumers and users of the product. And people developing community energy projects have a nightmare time navigating incredibly complicated systems and rules and regulations. And what we desperately need is to turn the telescope round the other way and make life easy for people who are either in groups or individually wanting to do something with their energy, and create an interface to the system which enables them to do that. And again, I come back to the point of digital technologies and the revolution that can create. We really do need a step change in thinking.
Absolutely. Running into our last few minutes of the session now, we have a question in from Nick Clark, which says, anyone have any clarity on yesterday's announcement on the business-focused energy bill relief scheme? It mentions fixed unit costs, but nothing about standing charges. Does anyone happen to know off the top of their head how standing charges come into that?
Well, I talk through how I understand it to be. Essentially, it's a reduction in the base wholesale price to £21. £211, I do beg your pardon. I'm thinking back before 2020. So 21p a kilowatt hour in the base wholesale cost from whatever the wholesale cost the supply calculated in the quote that was signed up. So on top of that, you'll have losses, load shake, broker commissions, network charges, which are the main driver of standing charges. So you'd expect to see a pence per kilowatt hour reduction, which will be individually calculated based on when the rules set out and when you struck your contracts. So standing charges stay the same, I'd imagine.
And one final question, I suppose. Thank you everyone who has put questions in the box and into the chat. I apologise that we haven't been able to get to more. If you reach out to me after, I will do my best to get answers over to you. But Stacey Brentnell has said, given the interplay between REMA, the TNUOS task force and the DUOS significant code review, do the panel think we risk being a little premature in our assessment of the viability, and it has just moved, viability of REMA options in terms of linking REMA initiatives to potential consumer benefits? So not the most straightforward question ever. Does anyone want to jump in initially, Sam?
Yeah, yes. I mean, very, very quickly. I mean, the REMA process is set up as a beauty contest of mechanisms. That's entirely inappropriate given the complexity and the dynamic nature of the system. What REMA needs to be is a process for constantly updating the markets, which are the interfaces between consumers and the energy system, in a way that helps to drive a more efficient energy system and helps deliver what consumers actually want. That's a very different framing. And so I do hope REMA is thought about in a different way.
I think just coming in on that, Molly, I think, when we think about the principles for REMA and the principles for an energy market that we want something that is affordable, that is, in line with net zero and maintains security of supply as kind of fundamental cornerstones, I guess, of what we want that process to look like.
Robert, on the back of your REMA event yesterday, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I just think one of the conclusions that we came to, and my background is the retail market, so I'm going to dodge the detail, but REMA is in great danger of just being consumed by events around it. I think the other thing that we were trying to emphasize yesterday, that it's great to have a technocratic discussion about the merits or not of locational marginal pricing. But as Simon was saying, there's a much bigger picture, and the danger is that REMA will just be consumed by events around it and become an irrelevance, even if it makes it past the next election.
Always a big if. Stuart, do you have any final points to add on that?
Really, just echo the point that Rachel made, that REMA really needs to be decarbonising the power system in a way that's consistent with net zero, and just reducing cost for consumers.
Fantastic. Well, I think unfortunately that's all we have time for today. Thank you again to all of our panelists for a really interesting conversation, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. The recording of this session, along with a write-up of some of the key points touched on today, will be up on Current probably this afternoon. And if anyone has any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or anyone else at Solar Media, and we will do our very best to get answers to you. My email is and then my surname, Lempria, Lemprie, at solarmedia.co.uk, for anyone who doesn't have it. And that's it. Thank you again, and I hope you will have a lovely Thursday. Goodbye.